Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 33rd audio chat on the Q News Patriot Rumble Channel series. I am the Q News Patriot, bringing together today with you a wonderful conversation with the Professor David Clements. My name is SG Anon. I'm very excited, actually, for our conversation and our discourse today because, in addition to discussing the various important components of we the people's longitudinal journey over these last few years, and indeed for some of us going back a number of decades, we're also utilizing a bit of their symbolism against them. 311 is one of their favorite days, the number 33, and it's sort of an implied 33 number. And we have the 33rd audio chat occurring over these very subjects, I think, to bring about some transparency, some clarity, and some understanding with each of you out there while sort of putting our finger in their faces at the same time. And I, for one, am getting an unusual level of satisfaction from that. Without further ado, Mr. Clements, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, SG, it's good to be with you. I'm a little concerned. I didn't think about the number, but there's so many trolls out there that can make hay of me frequenting your show on a number that's so loaded. But yeah, it's good to be with you.
Well, actually, at the end of the day, I think one of the things that becomes their downfall with symbolism, and we've heard this terminology utilized before, it of course originated online with this entity called Q, and individuals out there, I think you'd have to be, the first conversation that we ever had on the topic, the statement was you'd have to be under a rock to not have at least heard of that particular concept. But it's important, I think, to understand that the individuals out there in the deep state components of the superstructures of society have usurped, God's laws and God's earth here in the world. And they've, of course, taken along in that process various numbers and symbols and sigils. And I think we sort of have a cosmic duty, if I could put it so far out there, or maybe a cosmic interest is a better way to say it, a more universal godly interest for the whole of mankind to reclaim some of those arenas, just as we're reclaiming these pulpits of power. But as you have pointed out in the documentary Let My People Go, and we're going to talk about that here in just a moment, part of that process is indeed a growth and maturation, and that's a painful experience, I think, as a civilization as a whole. Before we get into that, Professor Clements, and I really am interested in your thoughts on some of that here in just a moment, but I wanted to take a minute, bring it back to the audience, or back for the audience, I should say, to go over a little bit of background, how you got into, the We the People fight, what became, this journey of Professor Clements in the election space, the Patriot space, and how that has transpired, in your personal life moving forward through this journey.
Yeah, I think as far as more recent memory, I was a university professor here in New Mexico State University. I taught business law, and like many, was looking around in dismay when the COVID pretext was launched, and then that was followed by George Floyd, and it seemed like half the cities were just in chaos. And I just remember thinking to myself, it's as if the enemy is gotten this memo to go for the jugular. And I think there's a level of, I guess, supernatural intuition that I was just on high alert, and that followed me throughout early 2020. I was fairly happy at my job. I found it very, very meaningful, serving students. And then the election happened on November 3rd, 2020. And I couldn't help but see that the architecture of what I observed was very similar to the cases that I prosecuted, in particular drug trafficking cases, except for instead of drugs, it was votes. And I had just such clarity on the issue that I spoke out early on, about what I thought was a false flag on January 6th. That was informed in part by my training in law enforcement. Every year when you work at a courthouse, which I did, you have to participate in active shooter trainings, and everything about January 6th felt like a glorified on steroids active shooter training. And the university president that I worked put out an email basically castigating anyone that voted for Trump that this was a coup that I guess was going to be achieved through zip ties. I mean, the absurdity of it was palpable on its face. But I decided to respond to this email that was issued by my university president, and it created a giant bullseye on my back. And I continue to comment on the lawsuits that were related to November 3rd, 2020, ended up doing some audits of our own throughout the state of New Mexico, found all kinds of findings that showed that there was instrumentation and manipulation of the machines. And then more recently, that work was culminated in a documentary that we just put out for free about a week ago. So that's the, I guess the Cliff Notes version.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And it gets us into, the background, I think, the meat of our discussion today, which is this reclamation of the world through the lawful legal process, right? Through the exercise of free will, inspired by God here in the world to do the important, and appropriate work. When we look at January 6th, I think that there's a great deal of compassion and love and mercy that is felt from we the people towards these individuals and this process and this entire awakening that we're going through, just in the same fashion that we have felt in similar veins, deep compassion, deep sympathy, deep encouragement in some regards for individuals that were victimized through things like 9/11, 2001, and others. And this is such an important component of the journey. So I'd like to take a moment, actually, if we could, before we move on to our next segment, and allow the audience out there to see just a brief clip of the film, the trailer for Let My People Go. It's available now on frankspeech.com. It can be downloaded and streamed completely for free. Give me just a moment here and I'll bring that screen up. All right, here we have the trailer. Again, it's available on frankspeech.com/letmypeoplego for the individuals out there. Just going to take a brief moment here and let the audience see that. Down here, there is an option that says to purchase movie, but there is no purchase required. Once you go through this particular portal here, it will actually just ask you for, I believe, an email address to send a hyperlink of the movie to. And of course, you'll be able to watch the movie for free from there. So without further ado.
There's still a disconnect with most Americans that don't associate what happened on November 3rd, 2020 with January 6th. But the reality is everyone that's rotting in there right now is in there because of what happened on November 3rd.
Did you have confidential human sources dressed as Trump supporters inside the Capitol on January the 6th prior to the doors being open?
Again, I had to be very careful.
It should be a no.
But how do you change that government when our politicians are selected rather than elected? When everyone is too scared to talk about the slave master that made it all possible?
It's an act of psychological warfare that you do to prisoners of war. We didn't know where we were going, why they were moving us.
So while the J6ers wear real chains, we continue to wear invisible ones. Oh, how I dream of breaking through the feed that keeps us asleep.
What I'm saying is nobody's following the federal law, including the vendors.
In China in particular, they advance persistent threats. Some of them are massive organizations, larger than many U.S. defense organizations.
You're talking about advanced persistent threat level players.
On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most difficult, how easy is it to hack into these systems?
Can I go to a 0.5 instead of a 1?
Across the country, when you've got systems that are in use in these elections and you can't look at them, it's beyond belief. Absolutely. It was stolen because it never should have been certified.
In the simplest of terms, we use proprietary machines that use programs to steal, shuffle, dilute, and plunder our most valuable property interest, our votes.
If Donald Trump's providential, aren't you providential? Ask yourself why you're here. We are transferring power from Washington, D.C., and giving it back to you, the people.
You cannot say that this went well. Those are lost votes.
There's something wrong with our system. I hold you to tips.
Today, I am here to overturn the money changers' table.
This is a battle of good and evil, and there will come a day when you will sit before a higher judge.
Not only will we win, but I will spend the rest of whatever years I have on this earth with my wife, with my children, praising God. And I'll encourage them and admonish them, you better keep this alive, keep the memory alive, because I don't want to go back to hell.
Every time I see the trailer of this documentary film that you and others have helped put together, it moves me in a deep way, because while it highlights the difficulties that we've faced along this journey, the difficulties in the reclamation of our society, and I think that was catalyzed for a great deal of us on January 6, 2021, both with the actions of the Congress and the actions of the Fedsurrection. It provides encouragement, and it provides a hopefulness that is not easily come by here in this spiritual warfare journey that we're living as we walk through life. And Mr. Clements, if I could, I just would like to ask, and maybe get a little bit personal here on the audio chat, how has this process spiritually impacted you and your family? You spoke of God in the trailer. How has it impacted you and your family, and where do you see us going as a nation from here?
Oh, well, great question. I've been a believer in Jesus Christ since, I want to say 2003. I've always been okay with the concept of God and the story of Jesus Christ. But like anything, you enter into something with an infant's understanding of your faith and what that exactly that means. But and I've had different moments where the Lord has opened my eyes and given me revelation to where you just see the depth of not just my own sin, but all the dark corners of the world. And but nothing could have prepared me for what we saw on November 3rd and January 6th. And so there were a couple sub-basements that were kicked in to my soul on coming to the realization that no man was going to save what I had just witnessed. And it was going to take something providential, historical, akin to 1776. And I just became keenly aware that there was going to be an opportunity for me to make a choice, not so much a choice that, where I'm worried about your judgment or my family's judgment, but I was keenly aware that history and God Almighty was going to judge people for not standing up when it mattered. And so there was a weight or a burden that was placed on just me personally, that here I am in a position of influence as a university professor, as someone who could speak to elections competently from an evidentiary standpoint. And that created in me an impulse to make decisions that were going to affect my life from a self-preservation standpoint, from employment to prestige to what people would write about me. And in particular, on January 6th, I had I paused to share. I don't know how much I want to share, but for me, it was a supernatural occurrence that I've ever experienced, where I just felt charged and convicted to do everything that I could to get to the bottom of the stolen election and to help the families that were affected at January 6th. So everything that I've done over the past 3.5 years culminated from an experience unlike anything that I've ever experienced as a believer. And so there's little instances like that if you're not a believer, may not amount to much, or maybe you're not even remotely curious. But for me, what I can tell you is everything that I've done over the last 3.5 years really has nothing to do with my occupation as a law professor, as a trial attorney. It has more to do with my walk with Lord Jesus and trying to be faithful to his call. And but it's impacted me. It's impacted my family. I've got 3 small children. My wife, she's been the recipient of many death threats. I've received many death threats. For the better part of 3 years, all of my children slept in our room on a pile of mattresses that we pull out from under our bed. And so it's definitely changed my life. And almost all the friends that I had prior to November 3, 2020, I don't have. It's strained relationships in my family where, I don't speak to many of them. So it's like, it's night and day, SG. I can't really recognize what the old life looked like. All I can tell you is that on paper, I was respected. And today I've got Wikipedia pages that tell you that I'm crazy.
It's so interesting because as I'm listening to your story, I'm realizing that it has echoes and essences of so many stories that have occurred post November of 2020, and really in response to the COVID pandemic, being the initial salvo of crazy here in the world, if we could call it that. And I just want to say thank you very much for what you've endured and the work that you've done and how you've brought focus to this fight in a way that is compassionate, deliberate, methodical. It's very, dispassionately presented, but it's of course grounded in the utmost passion for justice and restoration of balance in the world. And so I really appreciate that. And on behalf of my audience, thank you. As we move into the next part here, and I'm sorry, sir, go ahead.
I was just going to say, very, very kind. In some ways, I'm humbled that I get to participate in this adventure. I mean, so all of the bad things that I'm telling you, just want you to know there is a silver lining. I've been able to meet so many wonderful, great Americans over the last 3.5 years. So it's like the highs are really high and the lows are really low. But thank you.
Well, absolutely. And I think the silver lining is the fact that we're starting to have these conversations and others like them, at the grocery store and over the dinner table at various restaurants and eateries, and what we would call, I think, this movement of consciousness that can be summed up as the Great Awakening is really beginning to gain steam. Even with individuals like Tucker Carlson just a few days ago having Alex Jones on immediately post State of the Union. How many of us 15, 16, 18 years ago, and that actually would have been, before my time as far as being awake and aware to what's going on in the world. But I think anyone awake in that period of time, maybe since post 9/11, you couldn't imagine someone like Alex Jones getting any sort of notoriety. And indeed, I think, his initial presentation, his initial drama and theatrical presentation may have very well been a way to avoid too much serious scrutiny by those very serious intel agencies and bureaucracies that control these shadow powers. But now we have an individual like this and many others that have come on to enormous platforms worldwide, not only Tucker, although he's one of the more well-known ones, and they're having the open discussion, the obvious discussion about the incestuous relationships between transnational corporate elitists and government bureaucracies, the decision-making that is no doubt affected by the tracing of funding, right? Whoever pays for something controls the content of something. And I would think as a university professor, you're probably very well acquainted in that area, perhaps more so than most of the guests I really have on this particular program. But I want to move to, an idea sort of piggybacking off all of this, which is what we, the people, can continue to do in a more kinetic action step, right? Supporting the January 6th prisoners, for example, what various administrative steps we can take in our localities and municipalities, things of that nature. And I want to sort of cast that against, I want to cast that against the backdrop of what we, the people, are all about here in this journey, what this journey is supposed to teach us as we go through. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to pull up a list of the January 6th prisoners, and I want to encourage individuals out there to contact these individuals in any way possible. Come over here and we'll pull this up. Give me just a moment. Because we can contact these particular families and affected, entities and people, and help them and assist them to the greatest degree possible, whether that's financial, whether that's moral, whether that's simply sending a get well card or a happy birthday card, right? These types of things mean a lot. They provide connectivity and spiritual sustenance, I think, here in the world, and it's very important. So if we go through, you can actually find this list on newsweek.com. It's Newsweek/full list Capitol rioters jailed sentences. The article being published, let me go up here and double check here. I just want to get the date correct. Published on the 12th of September of last year, so one day after 9/11. And we're going to go through just a few of the names on this list. Kevin Galetto of Merritt Island, Florida. Alexander Bennett Shepard of Powell, Ohio. Connie Meggs, Dunlin, Florida. Ethan Nordine, Auburn, Washington. Joseph Randall Biggs, Ormond Beach, Florida. Zachary Rail, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Narayana Reiner, Baltimore, Maryland. Leo Christopher Kelly, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Bradley Wayne Weeks, McLeany, Florida. Michael Stephen Perkins, Plant City, Florida. James McNamara, Chicago, Illinois. Daniel Dink Phipps, Garland, Texas. Salvador Sandoval, Ankeny, Iowa. Henry Enrique Tarrio, Miami, Florida. William Calhoun, Americus, Georgia. Noah Bacon, Somerville, Massachusetts. Bruno Joseph Kua, Milton, Georgia. Brian Gunderson, State College, Pennsylvania. Peter Francis Stager, Conway, Arkansas. And Christopher Michael Alberts, Pilesville, Maryland. There are many other names on this list, but I wanted to go through just a few to highlight out there to the audience that these are real human beings that are in need of our attention and in need of our encouragement as we go through this period of time. And actually, that's where I want to come in, Mr. Clements, and get your opinion on this. How do we, the people, beyond gestures of support and physical interaction with people like the January 6 prisoners or others who have been intimidated by federal law enforcement agencies that have been weaponized out of control, how do we, the people, get involved? What more can we do, and what should we be doing from your perspective here in this spiritual war?
I think one of the things we have to think about things and take them to their logical conclusion. In other words, we need to do an internal inventory on counting the cost and figuring out what am I willing to give up? We're very, very quick to point out what other people should give up and what other people should do, but we construct arbitrary barriers on our own advocacy. And we see that somewhat showcased in the Q movement, because there's a level of let's lift up in other words, let's lift up the good things about the Q movement. One would be critical thinking, discernment, investigative prowess. And you could even say, to some degree, anonymity is necessary because you want to be effective in red pilling. And so a lot of people will embrace that, which is fine. But one of the things that I've always tried to come around and bolster and tell people is that you've got to leave the keyboard. There's a world out there that requires action face to face. And there are many, just to be fair, there's many people that are anonymous influencers that do remarkable work in their local communities. So I want to just put that out there. But there is almost this construction of my job is to red pill people on social media. My job is to just create memes. And I just don't think that's going to be enough. And so I'm constantly looking at the battlefield of hearts and minds that don't arbitrarily create a barrier to something more courageous and something that requires more of you. Because it's in those places of consequence. I'm talking about local county commissioner meetings where you show up and people can see you and they can attack you and they can write hit pieces on you and they can deploy lawfare. that's the place that we need to fill up with greater and greater numbers. And so, as someone who's very, very curious about Q, kind of some of the rifts and dynamics between Anons and digital soldiers, I don't pretend to understand it all, but I keep up with it because you have to. It's because there's so many influencers that can reach so many people that you're just trying to find the pulse of where is good advocacy taking place. And the thing that I'm most interested in is making sure that there's no temptation to enter into a passive framework. In other words, that we have to be engaged in a way that's always pushing forward to manifest the strongest form of advocacy. And so some people are on autopilot, and my thought to them is, I met with Trump for 3.5 hours in 2021. It was one of the most surreal experiences that I've ever had. And I remember him asking me, well, what should we do? And it's not like he needs my advice, but I came there to give him legal advice on, my observations over about a 9-month period. And I told him, like, look, Mr. President, I've read your lawsuits filed by your attorneys. They're fine. They're adequate. They weren't taken up, though, because of, failing to identify the right legal theory. They weren't taken up because of you, meaning you're the problem. Whatever it is that you represent to the swamp. So I could file something that has 10 months more information and it'll be dismissed twice as fast. Because again, the problem is you, Mr. President. And so I looked at him and I made a couple comments. Number one, I said, I personally can't believe that the fate of the Republic is in the hands of the My Pillow guy, referring to Mike Lindell. And keep in mind, my meeting with Trump transpired just after the cyber symposium. And Mike Lindell was actually waiting for us to join us for dinner. So in other words, I'm sitting there going, look, I was just participating in this great expo talking about the fraud as we knew it back then. And I'm sitting there going, there's no way that an entrepreneur has more information than the guy that created Space Force. And I'm looking at President Trump to get like any tells. And he's just looking at me completely stone-faced, right? And I told him something along the lines of, I don't see a way through the courts of law, meaning that the cancer was so great that I wanted to dedicate my time into reaching people in the court of public opinion. And he nodded his head. And what I can tell you is that he didn't tell me that there wasn't a plan. He didn't tell me that that was misguided. He didn't tell me, oh my gosh, I'm freaking out here because you're telling me that My Pillow guy doesn't have it all. He just looked at me with a remarkable confidence and as if he was just measuring me, and nodded his head and said, would you mind if I join you for dinner tonight? And so all this to say, like, if there is some larger plan at work that's above my pay grade and security clearances, irrespective of that, the American people need to meet President Donald Trump in the middle. And that was my closing thought. It's like, I just have to trust that you've got something, Mr. President, that you're the most powerful man in the world. You're the commander in chief by virtue of our legal votes. And I told him this to his face. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that when it's time for you to do what you need to do, that we'll be there waiting for you in the middle. And that's kind of the attitude that I want, or the vision I want to cast for people that are watching this interview, and why it's so important to take what you learn and understand on social media, but go to that local county meeting, confront the feckless administrators that administer your elections, that certify these rigged election machines, and tell them, you don't have to do that. You can withhold certification. We're entitled to a election that's free of rigging, free of rigged software, to ensure that we get the right guy. And so a little long-winded, but I mean, I really, that's what I focus on, SG, is how do we turn the scalpel inward and say, okay, what can I do better? Because there's a time I wasn't on social media at all, that I never been on a show with Tucker Carlson. And I'm staring at the camera going, please don't humiliate yourself on national TV, David. I'm saying like earnest prayers, sitting there going, I could make a fool of myself. And it's so surreal. And, you know, people see me now, I've been on a lot of shows, and they forget, like, I'm really no different than anyone out there. I just, I feel like the same fears of public speaking. I got the same fears of being embarrassed. And so don't let that be the reason why you don't get involved. It's just, I'm so inspired by mothers that show up to these meetings and give commissioners what for, and their hands are shaking and their voice is quaking. That's courage. And that's what makes it admirable, is if there was no risk to getting involved locally, then everyone would do it. And so I think the call is local engagement, where your school board curriculum is being decided, your taxes are being decided in many respects, but most importantly, the way that elections are handled, that we need to be masters of all affairs, and in confronting people and saying, no more. I'm the taxpayer. I pay your salary. I paid for this equipment. I paid for the building that we're in right now. And I want nothing to do with the garbage election system that we're using right now.
You know, I don't think that we could close out on any better note than that, because it is all about coming into our personal power through understanding our connection to and our omnipresence with a higher power. And I appreciate you telling us that story there, and giving us a backdrop for how you arrived at the point that you've arrived at here in this journey, because it helps to inspire, I think, so many of those that are just now beginning to come around, just now starting to shake the cobwebs off and really understand, oh, wait a minute, it truly is all happening in an election year. Excuse me. It very much bears the same flavor as before. Maybe that family member that I turned out for Christmas a couple of years ago wasn't so loony after all. Professor Clements, I very much appreciate you taking time to be here. We're going to close out today with a very brief little quote, actually taken from the entity online known as Q, because regardless of one's opinion of that specific entity and the extent to which that entity is real, what is unequivocal and I think irrefutable is the fact that it has spawned off the ability to have critical vertical thinking and empower and encourage one another in the true realization of who we are. The quote says, "Why are we here, and why are we providing crumbs? Building the army. If you're not convinced this is spreading, you're not paying attention. You, the people, have the power. You, the people, just forgot how to play. Together, you are strong, but divided, you are weak. For God and country, learn." And that's exactly where we're headed. Professor Clements, it's been an honor. For the audience out there, I'll be back with each of you again soon on the Q News Patriot. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today. Have a good one, everyone. This is SG Anon. Thanks. Bye-bye.